All right. How's everybody doing tonight? Good? Yeah? Okay, well, welcome to 1871. What'd you say? Oh, we can do you have a knock knock joke?
Yeah.
I don't have one. Do you have one?
Good chat.
I can tell you my 3-year-old's favorite knock knock joke. He does it constantly. Are you ready for it? Knock knock. Me. Meow. Literally, my 3-year-old does this. It's pretty good. I think he might have learned that from Alexa, which is also questionable, but he also thinks he's a cat or a tiger half the time. So it's all good.
Tell me about the different labs coming up, the AI labs.
Absolutely. Awesome. So why don't we start with 1871 first? So who here has never been here? Oh my goodness. Welcome to 1871. We are a global innovation hub here in Chicago, and come back. Now, I'm the Chief Experience Officer. My team, I think I saw Sarah here. There's other folks here. Oh, she's back there. So if you're not a member of 1871 and you haven't been here, Sarah is your girl. She started 2 weeks ago and she is like here and ready to meet everybody. But 1871 is a global innovation hub that is a nonprofit that truly exists to inspire, support, and equip early stage founders, growth stage founders, and corporate innovators to build extraordinary businesses. So our whole mission is to help people grow. And we do that through programs, community, resources across that full maturity curve. And those things change as the companies grow. Tonight, as an example, is one of our community events that brings cross communities together. And we are so thrilled to have you. I would love to tell you more about labs, but I now know that our whole panel is here. So afterwards, if anybody wants to learn more about how you can get involved through innovation, through 1871, find me or Sarah afterwards, and we would love to tell you more about what we do and how to get involved. But tonight, we're so glad to have you guys here for Courageous Minds Only. This is one of my favorite little events that we do, bringing some of our members, partners, founders onto the stage to talk about their experiences and help give those experiences back to you guys. So I know everybody here tonight is going to hear some nuggets. We hope that you bring those back and you share those with your friends and your colleagues, and you join us in the future. So with that, I would love to take it over to Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Do you know real quick if the online is on?
I will find out.
Okay, perfect.
Hello, online, if you are online. Yeah. I will find out too.
Thank you all for being here. I know there's like so many just different things in terms of being stretched for time and other things that you could be doing, and just grateful for the panel here. And for everybody being here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jason Hauer, co-founder of the Garage Group and CEO of Hauer X Holdings. The Garage Group is one of the top innovation consultancies that help brands basically stay relevant in uncertainty and unlock courage in leaders in the process. And the team over the years, man, I think we've been doing this like 8 years, created the Courageous Minds Only platform, really to create inspiration, courage, and ideas for leaders as you're trying to stay relevant, both from a career perspective, but also keep your brands relevant in uncertainty. And couldn't be more excited than I am tonight. We have Shayna Atkins from AtkCo, Greg Hocking from Mars, and Travis Colvin from Uber. They'll share more about their backgrounds and what they're up to as we get into the conversation. Before we dive in, though, I always share this. If you've been a part of one of these, you heard me, but I actually think it might be the most important time that you'll hear it. Is I feel like there's a lot going on in the world, specifically with AI impacting careers. One of my friends recently wrote an article. It's like 380,000 jobs this year alone have been displaced with AI. It's significant. It's happening, and I feel like we either feel it directly or it's coming and we don't realize it, right? And I think the reality is that it's going to create a lot of turbulence for us in our careers and what we're focused on. And I tend to look at it as being opportunistic, of being able to tap into like what we're great at, what we're potentially wired to, and creating opportunities for learning and growth. And tonight is that, to me, is like, so I would, as you hear the conversation, like listen for nuggets of things that inspire you, that potentially could push you in a different direction, could push you to understanding more of what's happening in the world and being able to apply it to your career, to your brand, to whatever you're building and whatever you're working on. All three of the panelists up here have amazing stories you're going to hear in terms of how they pivoted their careers. So there's a lot there. So I would encourage you to listen for things that you truly can take and apply to your career or your current situation. And whether it's tonight or even tomorrow, start driving things to action. So does that sound good? All right. Well, appreciate all of you being here. We'll start with the hardest question probably first, but I would love to start in Courageous Minds Only fashion by hearing about like a story or a moment in your career where you had to lean on courage. And we'll get into like more of the details and all that. But Shayna, will you kick us off? You have to flip the thing on the side there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. I was going to tell my founder story, but I think that, if anyone in this room is a founder, being a founder is hard, and making the decision to be a founder is hard. So I actually think my single most courageous moment was when I knew I had a business on my hands and I was sort of above my head in terms of my knowledge of what to do next in terms of our business strategy. And I myself didn't know what to do. So I remember the exact moment because I was laying down on my dad's couch drinking a glass of red wine. And that was a safe space where I could admit that I had a very fast growing business and I had this group of employees that I was accountable to. And I had to decide exactly how we were going to show up for the next year. And I didn't know what to do. So funnily enough, we were just talking about this. So I enrolled in an executive education course at Kellogg and took a class. And over the course of a longer period of time, I did one of the most courageous things I ever did, which was to completely pivot my business and do something I was completely uncomfortable with, which was one, drop a service that I was the best at, but was not the best performing in my business. And create space for actually what became my business today. So that's the short of it.
And just a quick thumbnail on who you are and what your business and what you're focused on.
Oh, absolutely. So thank you for that. Hi, my name is Shayna Atkins. I run a company called AtkCo. We are a process improvement company. So we actually help companies with process improvement solutions, and we stand behind what we do by actually doing the automation integration, and we sell hardware and software licensing as well. And we were named Inc. 5000 fastest growing company in Illinois for 2024.
You can clap for that. Come on, give her a big round of applause. She's working hard.
Thank you.
Greg, how about you, man?
All right. Can you hear me? Okay. Greg Hocking, Mars Snacking. We have big, iconic candy brands like Twix, Snickers, M&Ms. Moments of delight, I hope, coming up for Halloween with you from our products. Courageous moment for me is I came out of business school. I have a kind of master's in public health background, science related, did my MBA at Kellogg, and I was focused on healthcare marketing. And I had a successful career in pharmaceutical marketing. I felt like it was purpose-driven. I felt like I knew how to get things done in a company, was there for a number of years, overlapped with someone in the corporate strategy department that I clicked with well, but she left and joined a company called PepsiCo. And so after she had been there a couple of years, she said, why don't you come and join us? And I said, well, the job you have is in R&D and I'm in marketing. The industry is food and beverage and I'm in pharmaceuticals. It's not located anywhere near me. And you're asking me to do something that's functionally different, that's industry different. And how am I going to be successful here? But I think she was willing to take a risk on me, and I was willing to kind of step out of what is a comfortable place. And I think this is something we should talk about, like to me, the growth mindset around learning. I love this simple diagram of the bullseye is comfort, and that's where we all say, I got this. And you get to that point where that is complacency at its best, right? Like, I got this. I know what I'm doing. Well, that's where we all trip up. Then on the outside is panic. You don't know what to do. You're too scared to take any chances. But in between those things is the learning zone. And so for me, it became like, I will step out of an industry I know, a company I know, a function I know, and change everything about that and take a risk and join it. And that's when I moved from pharma to CPG. And I haven't really looked back, but I think to me, a lot of learning came from that in retrospect, but it felt like a big step at the time.
Amazing. Travis, how about you, man?
Sure. A little loud. Yeah, both of your stories resonate with me. I think, Shayna, one of the things you said is you weren't really sure what you were doing. And I think that's probably true for a lot of us, is we're unsure about what it is we're doing, where we want to go. But I think the important thing is that you continue to take action in spite of that. And if you just keep doing that, eventually it'll lead to a good outcome. I think, Greg, something that you had said that resonated with me is, for me, whenever I start to feel comfortable in a situation, that's usually a pretty good indicator that it's time to do something different. I think it's very easy to sort of fall into that complacency trap, and changing is hard because it requires you to be vulnerable, to step into something that you're very uncomfortable doing. And in the short run, it's incredibly difficult, but in the long run, I think it pays significant dividends if you can build a habit around doing that. So for me, I'm the general manager of Uber's grocery and retail advertising business now. I started my career working in retail, managing a group of individuals who collected on delinquent credit card guests. So if you had told me when I started my career that I'd be going from doing that to, leading a group of 50 people at Uber, that, a company that didn't even exist when I started my career, that would have seemed pretty far-fetched. So I pivoted from working at Target for 9 years to working in CPG at Kimberly-Clark, then moving to Chicago in 2018, working for Kellogg's in this building. So this is a little surreal for me that I used to work in this building. I started attending these events probably somewhere around that time, maybe even sooner, when I was with Kimberly-Clark, and found them to be a great way to get inspired. So for me, there hasn't been this sort of seminal, courageous moment. I think it's a series of like micro moments of demonstrating courage that ultimately like lead to this muscle that you develop over time. And as I was thinking about, when I was at Kellogg's, I'd been in CPG for 9 years, was starting to think, I'm probably ready to do something different. I'd worked in retail. I then worked in CPG. I was spending a lot of time when I was at Kellogg talking with different tech companies, Instacart, GoPuff, DoorDash, et cetera. And it became very obvious to me, they were not at all familiar with how CPG companies worked. And I started to think, well, that might be an interesting place to go build some skills. So how do I do that? And I think the courage started with recognizing like it was time to make a change. And then the second thing is like calling some mentors, like that's like an under leveraged tactic that I think more people could use, because the first conversation I had with my first mentor led to a conversation with someone he knew at Uber, which led to a conversation with that person. And that person was like, yeah, we're building out this whole team at Uber. We're trying to call on CPGs. We don't know anything about CPGs. That led to all these other conversations, ultimately led to sort of bringing a point of view forward on how I would run the business, how I would think I would run the business if I were to be brought in. That ultimately landed me a role that was different than the one that I was even talking to them about at the time that the journey started. And, my mindset at the time was like, I don't know if I can do this. I feel imposter syndrome, I think, as probably many of us do to this day, but like, just do it anyway. And what's the worst that's going to happen? In my mind, you're probably going to learn a lot. And I thought, even if I failed, I'm going to emerge with a background that's probably more marketable than the one that I have today. So I think, just continuing to have the courage to take that leap when you feel the uncertainty creeping in.
Travis, I love the framing there. Like, I think a lot of times it's easy on career stuff or just courage moments in general to focus on the event. So I took the role, I got a promotion, I changed industry, but I always look at just entrepreneurship, innovation, courage as a process, right? You're starting to dimension out a little bit in terms of some of the things that were happening that led up to the event. And I remember just like, I think we just happened to be catching up your first week at Uber and just kind of talking through that a little bit. But I'm curious for all of you as you think about your courage moment, whether you use the couch example, Shayna, or you dig into just starting your company. What were some of the things that you started processing through and led you and gave you the conviction to know that, hey, I'm ready to jump, I'm ready to do this? Greg, maybe if you think about your time in pharma, and it sounded like you had a solid role and you were on, you were cranking there, but like what led ultimately to you saying like, I'm ready to go do this and I need to push myself?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it is this steep learning curve, you know, that that you want to be inspired by. And I feel like in the beginning of my career at pharma, I felt like I could change almost everything about my job except for the company. I could change the drug I was working on, therapeutic category, the stage of life cycle the drug was in, my role within marketing, and you always learn from your leader, global brand leader, et cetera. So I could change all of that and not, you know, my paycheck stayed the same, you know, from the same company, et cetera. But then that was still within the company, within an industry. And then that became such a more different, you know, the next S curve, I guess, on learning to change industry, company, et cetera. I want to go back to something Travis said though, because I think mentors maybe for me versus personal board of directors, because to make that decision for me, I want, you know, I needed to hear from, and I think this is where this concept really came true for me, is like, I needed to hear from a bunch of stakeholders, and probably most importantly, those that would question my decision. Like, you know, so why would you leave the industry? Why would you leave a successful career? Why would you do, and that would probably be my father. Like, why would you leave? To then the people are like, you should have done this a decade ago. And why it's about time you woke up and did something different and you need to be challenged. And I think having those people around you that are going to push you to think differently and to step out of your comfort zone, you go from that inner circle of comfort to the learning zone. But I don't think, to me, I probably wouldn't have done it on my own without the consultation of those around me, this personal board of directors.
Yeah. Shayna?
Just for the sake of the conversation and kind of adding to the depth of it, there are two things that come to mind. And one is that I believe in kind of actively listening to community. So I love a good group chat, whether that be a WhatsApp group or a Slack group or et cetera. I've joined a lot of communities over time. So I think just being aware that you have a problem statement in front of you by knowing from your peer group when a problem statement emerges, like how people react or what kinds of gnarly things out there are to address. So that's one thing. And I think the second thing is the power of asking for 15 or 20 minutes of somebody's time that you do not know that well. So there is one woman who, her name is Lois, and she owns a professional services company very similar to mine. And now, you know, I can call her regularly, but at the time, kind of the time where there was a lot of like change going on, I didn't know her that well. So I got referred to this woman, and I swear in 15 minutes, she just gave me so much clarity by asking me clarifying questions. Because sometimes your peers or your environment, like the answers are not there. So you have to ask places that may not be like in your immediate network. And I'm speaking specifically because I'm a third generation entrepreneur, but I do have the largest business of anyone in my family at this point in my personal network. So I have to be real about, I can't just go everywhere for advice.
What gave you the conviction? Like, you're running the fastest growing company in Illinois, very successful. If you think way back to when you started though, like what gave you the conviction and the courage just to step out into that?
Part of it was the group chat, but I used to.
What did you get out of the group chat in terms of inspiration, encouragement, like just tangible advice on what it could look like?
I say that word kind of in a joking manner, but I actually used to run a women's brunch community. So I used to like have breakfast with women like every month for 3 or 4 years. And I not only invited corporate women to speak, but I would invite entrepreneurs to speak. And I ran a side hustle purely out of like, I started AtkCo purely because I had an idea. I went to my corporation at the time. I asked them if I could do the idea in the corporation, and they were like, nah. So I was like, okay, I'm about to just start a corporation, you know what I'm saying, and try it. And what really just happened is that it was an overtime thing. I'm not an overnight success at all. I side hustled for 2 years before I even hired my first employee. From there, the growth was pretty rapid. But does that answer? your
100%.
question?
Because I'm hearing, like, I love the concept of like mentors, but it's just operating as an open system, putting yourself in places like this to get inspired, but then you're asking questions, you're learning, and then you're translating that into growth as you go forward.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from others, but I'm definitely the product of being in places like this. I actually used to spend a lot of time in this exact audience and then a part of accelerators of 1871. So I've been through 2 programs here.
Travis, how about you, man? Like I know you had a very successful run at Kimberly-Clark and then Kellogg's, but you still had that kind of desire to push yourself. Like what gave you the conviction to jump, and maybe even the curiosity to start some of those conversations and explore and learn and create those potential opportunities?
Yeah, I think it looks successful sometimes on the outside. There's a lot of failures though, like along the way. So, and I think those are important because it builds resiliency. I think like one of the things I remember hearing from a mentor of mine earlier in my career, one of the things he observed about people who he viewed to be very successful is they had a habit of like putting themselves in difficult situations and always like figuring out a way to get out of it. Like just regularly finding themselves in uncomfortable situations and having to navigate their way out of it. And that really stuck with me. And I think one of the things I was trying to think about earlier in my career is like, how am I going to compete? Am I going to compete as a specialist, or am I going to compete as more of a generalist? Like those are 2 strategies that you can deploy. And I thought like, I didn't have the like highest quality pedigree. I didn't have the accolade, like some of the people I was competing with. So I thought pursuing a path of differentiation, and I will joke with people that like I'm not actually good at anything, but I'm exceptional at being average at a lot of things.
Yeah.
Which is a skill in and of itself. And one of the things kind of earlier in my career, I was listening to a lot of these all hands meetings that would happen, and you'd have the finance leader up there or the CEO or whomever was talking about the margin profile of the business, the EBITDA performance, the top line. And I remember thinking like, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Like this is foreign to me. So the best way, if I want to lead a business over the long term of my career, is I've got to learn the financial statements and how this works. And what better way to do that than to go work in the finance organization? I'm working in human resources of all places. At the time, of my boss in HR had come from the finance organization and sort of helped me build that bridge into the finance role, where I was then surrounded by a bunch of people who were very skilled at finance, but weren't particularly skilled at translating that language into a vernacular that could be broadly understood. So that was the thing. By having to like work in many different functional areas, it became sort of skilled at translating, the challenges in one area, what they were trying to communicate into this other area where they didn't speak necessarily the same language. And I've tried to build kind of a career around that. So I think for me, the curiosity was more born out of a strategy of differentiation and trying to become like an athlete as opposed to being really skilled at a particular domain. I just felt like that was probably going to create more resilience for me, because I've seen a lot of people who become very skilled at certain things, and then AI comes along or whatever it may be and sort of completely wipes out what the value proposition that they bring to the marketplace is. So I think you want to try to build some diversification in terms of your skill set as well.
Wait, can I double click on this
Absolutely.
differentiate point a little bit? Because I think this is great. Yeah, you come out of business school and you're like, point of difference is so important in marketing. Differentiate or die. Then you get to a company and 9 out of 10 people tell you this is your career path. You do this and then that and then this and then that. And this is what everybody else has done before you, whatever. And you're like, what happened to differentiate, right? And so you know, who's the one person that's going to tell you actually step out of the path that everyone else is doing? Because you want to differentiate as early as possible in your career to actually add a lot of value, you know, and so I think just remember that that is, you know, I think point of difference when it comes to your career is just as important as in your product or your business or differentiating from competition. That's my advice, but I think it's harder to find that advice from people giving you career tips.
It's interesting too. It's a good segue. The next question I was going to ask you guys. I feel like this may not be true or not, but when I see people like leaders that are truly differentiated and adding a ton of value and they're learning and growing, there's authenticity, but there's also conviction for who they are and what they're trying to do. And it's a clarity that comes from taking courage or taking risks and learning like through the process, right? And I'm curious, as you have hypothesized like had these courage moments and these courage steps, what have you learned about yourself through the process? Obviously, like Travis, you mentioned you failed. You said you've had just drink it on your dad's couch wine, just like, what the hell am I going to go do? Greg taking big risks industry. Like, you guys have kind of gone through that process. You're still pushing yourselves in your leadership and impact, but what have you learned about yourself in terms of skills you might had, like confidence and resilience that's allowed you to take bigger risks? I'm just curious, like what's been the impact of those courage moments, and how have you like paid it forward as you've gone along? But Shayna, you want to start us there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of a specific example. I remember working at a client and we were implementing, and this is so basic, but we were implementing a ServiceNow solution, which a lot of companies use for help desk. And we had reduced like the time, you know, for tickets by like 12 days and then increased time to market, all these great successful things. But there was something there where the client was like, well, I'm trying to achieve this bigger goal from a portfolio management standpoint. I want better visibility. I want this, that, but I don't really have a budget to go like achieve it with something else. And I'm like, okay, I actually think we can do this with ServiceNow, right? Like we can achieve all those things. In most cases, with most tools, you're not using half the features that you have available to you. I know that's a very geeky example, but what I learned about myself, and that was just an example of like pushing through, like actually listening, actively listening to the customer and being courageous enough to say, okay, let's take a step back. And yes, we had wins. And as a business owner, when you have big wins, sometimes you want to kind of like stop there because the project's a little messy, right? But to have the courage to keep going and achieve the actual goal was big. And what I learned about myself is resilience when you're faced with complexity is really important. Like sometimes the problem is a deeper problem and you need to go, go down the 5 whys to get to the core. So
It's amazing. Travis?
Yeah, the question was like, what have I learned about myself?
Yeah, just like if you've taken these different courage moments, I think it's easy to focus on the event, but if you think about it as a process, how have you built resiliency? Have you unearthed skills or just mindset or ways of working? Just how have you learned and grown through that, and what's been the fruit of taking those risks essentially?
Yeah, I think one of the pieces of feedback that I remember getting earlier in my career from my HR up at the time was to be more vulnerable. I remember thinking, like, I have no idea what that means. Like, what does that mean? I think I was sort of so wrapped up. My identity was sort of so wrapped up in my work and whatnot, and I came across in a way that I don't think people viewed me as being particularly receptive to feedback. And I thought, that's interesting. And I started having conversations with different mentors, and I found, the mentors who sort of let their guard down a little bit were getting access to so much more information versus the ones that sort of created this power distance where you were always sort of keeping your cards close to the vest. So I thought, like, that's an arbitrage opportunity. If you can create an environment where people feel comfortable opening up to you, you're going to have access to a lot more information. And I think I've really tried to adapt as I've grown in my career now, where at a place like Uber, one of the things I observe is there's a significant power distance that exists between the senior leaders and a lot of the people who are sort of on the ground floor. And as a result, like there's all these blind spots that are very apparent to me that I observe a lot of the leaders operating with, where I've tried to create an environment where like my team, my colleagues, anybody can feel comfortable telling me what's ever on their mind. And I think like I've learned that vulnerability and collapsing that power distance and trying to create an environment where people feel psychologically safe to tell you what's really going on is incredibly important. You know, the other thing I'd say is, you know, I've learned that I don't think you want your identity to be completely dependent on your work either. Like one of the things is going back to the theme of diversification for me that makes me feel more comfortable taking big swings is I've got this portfolio of other stuff that fills my bucket, so to speak, be it my kids or my family or my health or exercise, whatever that traveling, whatever that may be. And I think that's really important because if you take a big swing in one domain of your life and it doesn't work out, you need to create sort of this environment where you've got other things then that can fill that void. And I think if you're all in on your identity being wrapped up in your work, like you're naturally going to be more cautious, I think, because you're so afraid of like what happens if you make a mistake and this thing gets taken away from you. So I think that's probably another thing that I've learned as I've matured in my career is you want to create some level of diversification in terms of where you're getting your identity. I think that makes you a better leader.
Yeah, I love that for sure. Yeah. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit different for me. So I join PepsiCo, new company, new industry. I have the confidence of my new boss. And then you meet the team and they see your resume and they're like, what are you going to teach us? You know nothing about our industry. You know nothing about our company. You've never been in food and beverage. So like, great, like prove it. And so this is where the fake it till you make it phrase is not going to help you, right? They're like, you are completely faking everything about why you're here. And so I think that's the moment for me. You're like, oh, I thought I just took the most courageous leap. Now I've really got to like get real with like why, you know, and so I think to me, that's what's good is there, you have no choice but to be humble, say you're here to learn, you know, you couldn't do their jobs. You know, you have to earn their trust, respect, and in as quick a way as possible. And I think that just to me is the, you know, the power of asking questions and engaging deeply in their work. And you find your ways to kind of get through that period. But to me, that I guess has always been something that stuck with me is that that just didn't happen at other promotions I had when I felt like I deserved to be there, you know, because it was a company and industry, et cetera. I knew, because it's different when everybody else feels like you don't deserve to be here.
This is great. I want to pivot the conversation a little bit in terms of how courage is showing up as you're leading your businesses today and kind of what are either the headwinds, tailwinds, and things that you guys you're looking at. Shane, I'm curious, like obviously you're growing like crazy, very successful. As you start to think about some of the next big moves that you guys have to make at AtkCo, like how is courage showing up in your day-to-day leadership now, and either decisions you make and or things that are on the horizon that you guys are stepping into?
One thing I care a lot about is culture at the moment, company culture. Just because there are a lot of things going on in the world, and at the end of the day, it's my team that pretty much fuels everything that's going on at the moment, like everything. And so I'm really sensitive to what are the things that we're doing to kind of maintain and keep the like, you know, small team magic as other things might be happening, changing and growing, but also as the world like that we live in is completely like feels like we're just like being shook up all the time. So one of the things, like a few things that I've been thinking about is just like health and wellness, like you said, like giving people space to actually like be on whatever health and wellness journey at whatever level. or peer recognition. Like, how do we tie our values back to like saying good job in a remote environment, right? Like it's not the same thing as like being able to, go to the side and have water cooler conversations and stuff like that. So I think about stuff like that like all the time. I'm obsessed with that because I feel like if I really invest in that, then the innovation and the ideas and what we do next emerges.
Travis?
Yeah. So how is this courage showing up like big swings
Yeah,
today?
just like what's going on just in the Uber ads business, like any big things on the horizon, like how is courage showing up kind of in your day to day?
Yeah. I mean, there are nothing but big things on the horizon at a place like Uber. I think, I used to like think that I was building businesses when I worked inside of some of these other companies. And really what I was doing is really optimizing existing businesses, just trying to like move the cruise ship in a different direction, turn the dial a little bit. And I remember interviewing at Uber when I was meeting with my boss, and I said, he was asking, why are you interested in Uber? And I said, I really want to build something. So Uber advertising, if you think about Uber, it's a mobility business, it's the Eats business. Advertising is this sort of brand new organ that we're installing in the body of the company. And the natural tendency is to reject it. And now I interview a lot of people and I'll ask them, why are you interested in this role? And they'll say, because I want to be part of building something. And my first response is like, are you sure? Because like, if I knew then what I know now, I'd probably think very differently about, like, I was very naive on how difficult it was going to be to actually get this business off the runway. So every day there's nothing but uncertainty. So these are judgment calls, dealing with probabilities, trying to figure out, should we do this or should we do that? There's no clear right answer. There's just sort of pros and cons. And, we have to rely on our informed intuition to a large degree. And like, these are serious decisions that are highly uncertain. So we don't know the extent to which people will continue to buy groceries online. Are they going to choose to buy those groceries from us? And how fast are we going to grow? And, based on that, how much resourcing can we put behind the business? How should we structure the team that's changing every 6 months? So what types of profiles should we hire for? Like, these are all decisions that we don't have the luxury of just sitting around and sort of waiting to get perfect information. So I think that's the other thing, is I used to see this, I don't know, Greg, if you see this in CPG a lot, but there would be a lot of time that would go by moving from 70% of the information you need to make a decision to like 80%. Like there's this point of diminishing returns where you're not factoring in the opportunity cost of making decisions faster. And, one of the things that I just can't do in my current role at Uber is I have to make decisions very quickly with nowhere near the type of information that I would prefer to have and that I was sort of accustomed to having perhaps in a previous life. And I think in tech in particular, it's very much a winner take all mentality. I mean, the reality is you're probably not going to have 10 rideshare apps on your phone. There's only room for 1 or 2 players. So that creates a sense of urgency that's relentless to make these decisions and move quickly. And when you're doing that, inevitably, you're going to fail more often than you would like to. So I think figuring out, like, how do you deal with that failure? How do you use that setback as a sort of slingshot to propel you forward to make better decisions as you get going? And just the series of 2 steps forward, 1 step back is something that I've gotten progressively more comfortable with. Like, I've been conditioned to just, oh yeah, that's how it works now. But it was certainly a shock to the system for me when I first stepped in.
Yeah.
I'm going to add to that, I guess premium I put on decision quality for a leader. We talk a lot about clarity, but not certainty. And, to me, nothing kind of takes a leader down, in my view, more than the lack of decision-making ability, because it's so important. And I think, internally, what we recognize is we're trying to build partnering muscle for a variety, for growth, for sustainability, to take advantage of external forces. And we could talk a little bit more about that, but decision-making at pace is something we have to get better at. And sometimes that means a fast no for a startup is way better than a slow no, so you don't waste time. But this idea that to me, the worst decision is no decision. A bad decision is way better than no decision. And, you just, to me, that's just not a leader if you can't make a decision. So that's one of the things we're working on. I would say, and that can be applied to working with startups on innovation. But I would say, even back to your AI point, I think at Mars, we see this technology as one we want to experiment with, yet it requires responsible governance. So we're taking a position. We want to be leading among CPGs, but not leading among all companies, because we're not there from a risk appetite perspective. But that means, we might be working on concept generation in our marketing teams. We might be working on new product development or recipes within our R&D organization, and we might be working on consumer engagement activities, kind of with consumers. So, but it's a series of experiments we're trying to learn from, but we need to make some decisions on this. And it's okay if we're not on the bleeding edge. We don't want to be at the back of the pack, but we have a position we need to stick to it, to be a responsible, to kind of lead in a responsible way, which is what we feel comfortable with. But to me, the ability to make decisions in this environment where we will not have certainty about anything is what leadership calls for at the moment.
Yeah. Keep
Oh, I
going.
was gonna speak about it. Yeah, you can go.
Yeah. I'm going to open it up for questions here in a few minutes. I would love some super tough, really tough questions for the panel. They can handle it, to be thinking about questions. You're in tech. You're talking about leveraging AI. You're in tech. I'm curious. No predictions here, but as you think about the velocity of change with technology, with AI, just thoughts in terms of how to be thinking about that from a career standpoint. Like any thoughts and ideas of what the disruption it may cause, it is causing, and tips and ideas for navigating that as we go forward. Because I think that it's already creating a lot of turbulence and is going to continue to. And how can leaders here who want to step into courage, but how can they navigate that? But Shayna, why don't you kick us off there?
Yeah, there are some statistics that 6 out of 10 people in the workforce will be disrupted by AI in their job. So I have a couple schools of thought. I think you said it very eloquently when you said, we want to be at the top of CPG, but not necessarily at the top of all companies, because some people are just diving head first. But there's some organizations, with my company, we work with a lot of legacy companies or in the public sector where they cannot even use a lot of tools, just because there's not any governance around it. It's not defined. So I think we're moving into an age where leaders have to be thinking about reskilling and upskilling in creative ways, and where experimentation is the way to go. I also believe that we are moving towards what I call like a 2-speed workforce, right? So it doesn't mean that everybody has to be doing everything, but how do we, decide within the teams that we work on, not only what functional areas they may focus on and use generative AI or other tools, but also like who's going to be that group that's going out, like experimenting with stuff and bringing it back. And, kind of leading the charge and bringing others along with them. I think the other reality of it is, as a leader, your team's using it anyway. So developing some sort of clarity or point of view around, just quick hits that fall within policy of wherever you are, around what works or what doesn't work, or journal club, something where it's an open, safe space to have good discussion, I think makes sense.
Greg?
Yeah, I think the ostrich, put your head in the sand strategy is probably not a sound one. I think for me, like, look, there are big company problems with AI about data privacy and cybersecurity and all that. But to me, we're encouraging just find different use cases for AI. So I think rather than predict like any of these disruptive technologies, how it's going to impact us, it's more just like know that it will and continue to experiment with ways it can be useful for you. So I'm inspired when I talk to kind of entrepreneurs and people that are doing a lot of shortcuts, whether it's LinkedIn posts, market research, things that they're kind of doing in a very scrappy way for AI. And that's much different than we might be doing on the big company side. But I think that's why just having, ways to try to, I go back to kind of early days of digital marketing where we're trying to get 1%, better by 1% every day.
Yeah.
This is the way, we should be using AI. It is like a thought partner, but for a thought partner, you don't just ask it one question once. That's the whole idea. It just needs to be more of the habit in how you use it, and it will get better over time. So it's, I think we're just encouraging, at least on our teams, we find a safe way for you to continue to experiment with it without, because it's going to happen anyway, which is your point.
I love that. I have a build, but Travis, you jump in here as well.
So I think Uber, Dara, our CEO, would say like Uber's a AI first company. It's like embedded in the DNA of the company. We generate so much data between the trips and the delivery orders that it's just embedded into optimizing every aspect of the business in some sense of the word. I think on a more personal level, a few months ago, my boss left the organization. I inherited a number of folks from his team, and I was just completely overwhelmed trying to figure out, like, I've got, 12 direct reports now, and they all have teams underneath them, and I'm trying to meet with all of them individually and then doing skip levels. And I've got to figure out I still have the same amount of time, but the constraints in the time have gone up exponentially. So, I started leveraging ChatGPT to figure out what are, optimization strategies for how to organize my time. And I started batching one-on-ones and then sequencing them in a very specific order. And I found ChatGPT to be particularly useful, helping me do something like that mundane. And then, we're looking for applications all the time on how can we think about using AI to augment the productivity of individuals. So a very specific example where we've just used that recently in my business is when we're talking with CPGs, we need to build catalog infrastructure that helps us identify the fact that Gatorade, Frito-Lay, Pepsi are all part of the Pepsi portfolio, or Eggos, Pringles, Fruit Loops. Historically, we're all part of the Kellogg's portfolio. So you need to match brands to CPGs. These CPG companies are just holding companies with a bunch of brands underneath them. And that sounds simple, but it's actually really difficult to do that.
Careful.
So, our solution to that is rather than go hire Nielsen or somebody to that we have to pay thousands of dollars to give us access to their taxonomy where we can ingest it and build the reporting infrastructure, we just said, all right, we know all the brands. ChatGPT, give us the parent company for each of these individual brands. We plug in hundreds of brands and quickly built our own taxonomy in a matter of minutes. That's the type of thing that a lot of companies wouldn't even be thinking about. You just go pay thousands of dollars potentially for a licensing deal with Nielsen or somebody who's already built that construct in your behalf. So I think there's all sorts of ways, but the head in the sand thing is dead on, in my opinion. Tinker, you have to be experimenting with it, and it may not be obvious where that's going to lead, but I think the more you experiment it, the more the light bulb is going to go off on oh, here's another domain that I think I could apply this to.
I was just going to say, the best predictor of kind of future performance is past performance. And we've been through many industrial type revolutions in the past, right? From railway to the Ford system, et cetera. So I think we're kind of in the midst of something very similar. And there's this intersection of, the humanization and personalization of technology that's happening right now. It's still going to take us as people, right, to figure out what's the magic in all of that and how we bring the best of that to our industries, to our companies in our particular roles. So I do see a bright spot for sure. And I think that, whatever exposure you have will accelerate your career ultimately.
Amazing. So one last question, and then I'm going to open it up. And again, we want some really great, no softballs, just tough questions. You get one piece of advice for living or kind of operating a courageous career in uncertainty. What's the number one piece of advice for leading a courageous career in uncertainty? Whoever's ready to jump in first, roll.
Go
Okay,
ahead, Jeff.
Shayna, you don't have to go first. I think it's making decisions, not to just go first. But I think I think it is about making decisions. And to me, strategy is about choices. Choices are about decisions, and leaders make decisions. So I think just know that for every bad decision you make, that's way better than not making a decision. And your people will see that around you. And it's okay to make bad decisions. I would say it's not okay to make no decisions.
Travis?
I think it was maybe Richard Branson or somebody that said something to the effect of like, the brave may not live forever, but the cautious don't live at all. Like that's always stuck with me. And I think I've developed a set of like principles that I try to adhere to inform how I think about decisions. And one of them is that like, failure is better than regret. I think there's I'm like obsessed with people, what they're thinking about when they're 80 and on their deathbed or whatever it may be. And a lot of the regrets they have are these regrets of omission and like not taking the leap when the opportunity presented itself. And I think it's like easy in the short term to overanalyze the decision and the what ifs, but like in the long run, it's probably not going to matter. So I think, for me, easier to live with failure than is regret. And I've always thought like worst case scenario is you're going to end up learning something. So if you're on the fence, it's probably an indicator that like you should take the lead.
Very well said. Shayna?
I'm a very process-oriented person. So when I don't feel very courageous, I do 1 day of bold for like between 7 and 15 days. So basically just do one bold thing every day. And because practice makes perfect. It could be as wild or simple as like DM the hot guy from The Bear. You get what I'm saying? But after a while, you feel like you can approach anybody, say anything.
Yeah, that's what led you to starting your company too, right? Yeah, that's true story. But can we give them a round of applause? All right, let's open it up for some Q&A, and then we'll get you guys connecting again. So start here in the middle. You guys don't have to all answer the same question. We'll just keep it going quick. Here, just.
It's not working. Still your mic. So we do have attendees virtually. We've got about 20 folks online. A quick shout out to we have folks from Brazil, Minneapolis, Cincinnati that are listening in. So out of respect for them, I'm going to ask that all questions are through the mic so they can hear it. So I'll walk around to you guys. Just keep your hands raised and I'll make my way around. So.
Great. Thanks to the panelists. I was taking notes from all of you guys. Really appreciate the insights. I had a question for Shayna. So when you were in your side hustle era, before you made your first hire, what kept you motivated to continue doing what you were doing before you really probably started seeing a lot of the progress and you started really making traction?
That day of bold was a story I told Jason. So yes, that was one of them. I would say one thing that really kept me motivated is I really love what I do. So if you love what you do and you really believe in your idea, surround yourself by other people who who can hype you up from time to time. I think just the last thing is I put myself on a pretty strict regimen. So it's actually funny because I want to get back to that life, but I was like working out, eating, like I had to have really strict habits. I actually ended up getting promoted at my job right before I quit. And it was just because I was just like that focused.
My question is for Travis. You mentioned that you deal with a lot of failure because of the rapid decisions that you have to make at Uber. What is your process for dealing with those failures, and what do you do next to learn from it and move forward?
I think the biggest thing is just I take accountability. I think the last thing you want to do, what I often see happen is something doesn't go right. And there's this tendency to be like, well, that's on Jason. Like he screwed that up. And Jason's looking at me and he's like, that's Travis's team that screwed that up. That is a gigantic waste of time. And I think it's probably because people feel really insecure. And I actually think like when you're the person that takes credibility and says like, I screwed up, that's on me. Particularly when you do that on behalf of your team. One, like you save the company a lot of time and energy. You get all like the bullshit out of the way of everyone being frustrated with each other. And I think it sort of sets a standard for the expectations of the organization in terms of the behavior. If a leader's operating that way, then it creates an environment where everyone else should be operating that way as well. And it helps you build a lot of credibility with your team. So I think for me, it's really, we do, more tactically a lot of postmortems to say like, this thing didn't work. Let's like get to the root cause and really figure out why. Was it because like our assumptions were off? And if so, which assumptions and whatnot? So I think like that's also really important is you take the time to diagnose, like, did it not work because it was the wrong thing, or some part of what we were trying to do didn't work the way that we thought? And should we just course correct, or should we kill this thing? So I think not enough time and energy is put into reflection and really thinking about like what caused the decision to not work out the way that you thought it might be. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I like on a personal level, take accountability. I think that's like an underrated strength of leaders. And then on sort of the more practical side, like taking the time to reflect on what didn't work and understanding the root cause as to why.
So my question, I came from like a big org and now I'm an entrepreneur. And so I think I sometimes suffer from like decision paralysis. And you said a bad decision, better no decision. I agree with that. But to anyone on the board, what are like some questions that you might ask your team or ask yourself before you make a decision, even if it's 50% the knowledge or 70%, or like, what are some like specific factors that you want to know prior?
Yeah, I think for me, maybe two things. One is what are the implications if this is the wrong decision? Am I gonna lose a limb? Or am I gonna be able to just go back on it, right? So I think it's like how permanent and long lasting, what's the, or is it reversible, right? Like I turned left and I could just go around the block, like, okay. So I think, so part of that is there. I think the other is trying to find someone, could be GPT or like a trusted advisor, to kind of argue against what you think your decision should be, and to play that role, just to kind of beat it up a little bit. And then I think that just gives you like, you're able to then, I think, be a little more at peace with the decision because you've had a fresh pair of eyes and perspective, someone you can trust. Those would be the two things I would add.
If I could add one more thing, it'd be, what's my stopping point once I make this decision, right? So like, if you're gonna go in on something, like at what point do I know it's time to turn around?
Yeah, and Sam, one more just to build on the sort of like, what are the implications if I make the wrong decision? Jeff Bezos has a great framework for this. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like type 1, type 2 decisions. Type 2 decisions are these two-way door decisions where if like you get it wrong, it's really not that big of a deal. The type 1 decisions are like, who do you marry, or, whatever. You could get fired if you make the wrong decision. Like those you want to spend a lot more time thinking about. And I think the important thing is to diagnose like which of the decisions are you making. Is this a type 1 decision or is it a type 2? And then optimize for speed on the type 2 decisions and optimize for decision quality on the type 1 decisions.
Yeah. And I'd add too, I think from a decision-making perspective, we tend to think about like what could go wrong. Like that definitely need to consider everything that's been shared here. On the flip side, particularly entrepreneurship and early stage, is like, what's the opportunity cost of actually not doing the thing? Like in terms of what you're not going to learn or what you could learn, the business opportunity, whatever, right? So thinking about it from the inverse of what am I actually going to lose out on if I don't do this? Let's keep going. Just like one or
Yeah,
two.
so this question is for Travis. Travis, you talked about blind spots and encouraging members of your team to bring those to your attention. What happens next? Are you empowered to be a cultivator of change with that information, or does it tend to fall on deaf ears when they do that?
Yeah. I struggle with this, to be candid. Like on the one hand, I want to create an environment where my team feels comfortable sharing bad news with me. On the other hand, I've also sort of observed, like you can swing the pendulum too far in the other direction, where what I started observing is like a lot of problems were just getting dropped in my desk. And I was kind of like, well, what do you want me to do with that? Like, so I tried reframing it where if you're going to create that environment, like come with a point of view on how would you recommend solving it? Oftentimes that individual is going to be closer to the problem itself. So I think there's this kind of balancing act for me personally, of trying to create the environment where we get, clarity on all the blind spots, but at the same time, not abdicating individuals of just because you've surfaced a problem that they don't feel a sense of accountability to solve it. So like that's the calibration for me that I'm constantly trying to optimize against, because I noticed when I created that environment, I think in a way that people felt pretty comfortable opening up to me, like it just resulted in me inheriting a lot of problems. So I've tried to actually like dial it back a little bit where that ownership is on that individual, and framing my role as like, how can I break down the barriers that are standing in the way for you?
These questions are phenomenal.
We've got a few more. We're going to try to go, we'll do speed rounds. We're going to try to get through them.
End up here in the front here.
That works.
I got
One online real quick.
One from the virtual audience. They said the panel spoke a little bit about how big companies are using or potentially using AI. What about small or medium-sized companies? What applications of AI can SMBs utilize?
I mean, the world is your oyster. So I mean, of course, ChatGPT for generative AI, like do a quick search on any of the plugins. If for RFP writing, I use Rogue. I love it. CapCut for marketing. Yeah, you can create your own video. There are so many. Motion for scheduling. I like that for specifically the problem that Travis brought up. But yeah, I hope that was a good quick hit list. Oh, and get a note taker, but don't do one of the annoying ones. I like tactic.
Yes, thank you so much for the feedback thus far. Quick question. A lot of people like to talk a lot about courage from a third-party perspective when it's not themselves being put on a frying pan. And so when we talk about what makes us better, whether it's as career paths or whether it's about us being entrepreneurs, what advice do you give to those people who have not just talked about it, but are literally putting their lives as the motion to that movement, number one? And then number two, what proof of concept opportunities do all of the panelists have for those people who are actually out here doing the work, not just talking about the work, and how we can go ahead and advance that in a mutual way that's mutually beneficial, not only to us as individuals, but as a collective?
Brother, who do you want to answer that question?
All.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Feel free. Any and all.
I mean, Travis brought out the quotable quote, so I'll follow with one. I heard this recently. Courage doesn't have to roar. Sometimes it's just that little voice that says, tomorrow morning, I got to get up and do it all again. And I think, to me, this is like, we're trying to make this like these big macro kind of decisions around courage. And I think, to me, it's about the persistence of being courageous every day, which what entrepreneurs need to do. It's the sales person who says no 99 times out of 100. And so I think, to me, that is what real courage is. It's not a one-time I'll stand up when the spotlight or camera is on. It's the everyday courage it takes to be successful.
I will say, I think first of all, I will tell you, I'm accountable for payroll. So when you're accountable for payroll, the courage, I believe, is there. But I will not use me as an example. I think some of the most courageous people are the people who choose to do business with me. Like my customers can go to McKinsey, Accenture, PNC, like name a consulting firm, right? So they're very courageous in that decision. And if my firm is not successful, sometimes that can cost them, right? So that's courage. It's also, there's a lot of courage in advocating for people in rooms that you will never be in. The conversations that are had where you are never in the room. So there's a lot of like silent, there's a lot of conversations or dialogues or events that happen when you're not there. I think just continuing to tell the story and do the good work and like have the data to back up who you are is what's so important in being visible, because those conversations, especially in a town like Chicago, that's so critical and so important. That enables people to feel more courageous to buy in and invest in you.
Awesome.
Last question and we'll wrap it up.
This is about to be a doozy.
You asked for it.
You asked for it. So I happen to be a woman of color who's a leader, and I have the pedigree that I think you said you didn't have, right? that means that I don't have the privilege to fail in my organization. So I'd like to hear from everybody, including you, sister. What advice do you give somebody like me that's working a Black job at a very high level, that I don't have the privilege to fail, but I still need to be courageous? Because in many days, my courage comes because I just did not smack somebody in the face because they did something to me. And that's courageous. So I'd like to hear back from you all.
Okay, so I'm not in a big organization, but actually my last statement was talking about folks like you, right? And the reason why I like added more depth to some of the points around mentorship and advocacy was because there are instances where you cannot just go to certain parties for advice, because that might cost social capital that sometimes as women, people of color, disabled, that we cannot spend. So sometimes you got to go to more anonymous groups to get your advice. That is true. So that was part of some of the advice that I was giving and embedded in what I was saying. I would say the one thing that, just specifically addressing your comments, is that there is space and room for you to have private, bold conversations and ask questions and say, hey, I want to try this, or hey, I want to do this. What would be the best way to go about it for safe mentors? And in those spaces, they will tell you yes or no. I have those conversations almost daily in like client or sales environments where it's like, nah, that's too bold. Like you would be stepping on too many toes over there. So I think just like being able to gut check decisions. There's also this concept of like, you got to work twice as hard to give half as much type of thing. Surround yourself by other people who work hard and do well, you know what I'm saying? So that you don't feel so alone in the process. So that's my other point of advice.
Thank you so much. Can we give another round of applause?
All right.
Don't.
Awesome, right? Yeah. So yeah, another round of applause. Come on, guys. So I will say what's great about these conversations is I feel like we just got started and now it's over. So it leaves us all wanting more. We are going to quickly, the panelists, I'll have you guys go over here for a quick photo, but we will try to stay to answer a few questions. If we can also help with your connections or future feedback as you guys have questions, please let us know. But if you really enjoyed this conversation, if you're looking for other insight, I will tell you that these sessions are always wildly different. And every time the nuggets that come in are wildly different and they make you think about things differently. All of the recordings from the prior sessions are online at thegaragegroup.com/CMO, which stands for Courageous Minds Only. I highly recommend you check those out. So those are out there for you. This one will also be posted. It was recorded here this evening. But definitely recommend you checking that out. As you guys have, again, comments, feedback, we always love them. Really appreciate everybody being here. We do this for the community. So with that, we'll close on out. Thank you, everybody.